wasn't until January 1967 that Aboriginal people in Australia were considered humans for the first time. In January 1967, there was a national referendum to decide if Aboriginal Australians should have Australian citizenship. Up to that point, they were officially, and you can document this, classified as flora and fauna and plants and animals.
In Australia, they would literally breed out the melanin of the people.
Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. In case you're new here, my name is Maren.
And I'm Maureen. So in today's episode, we're going to be listening to the Aboriginals and melanated people of Australia. And for the longest time, we've been hearing from Americans and a few times from black Brits and a few black people from Europe who speak about racism and what colonization or slavery did to them.
Right.
But in today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the Aboriginals of Australia and what it is like living in Australia as a black person.
Right, guys, in today's episode, it's gonna be an eye-opener, and I feel like when you listen to what they're saying, it makes me realize that white people across the world are all the same, and I guess it makes sense because they all share a common ancestor, but the behavior is exactly the same. And my question is, as a melanated nation, as a melanated group or any other people of color, how did it get to such a point where just one race was able to enslave all the others, and right now it got to a point where they've put themselves in a place where they are the ones thinking for others, they're the ones like leading others, they're the ones who sets the pace of how things should go. And you know what I mean. I don't know, guys, let us know what you think about this episode on the comment section. We'd really like to know your thoughts and opinion. Also consider subscribing if it's your first time here, but for now let's watch and then we come back with our commentary.
Yeah, and before we go, I'd also like to point out that in as much as a group is usually judged by the action of many in that group, it is also important to note that it's not all white people who behave this way, right? So guys, let's watch and then we come back and talk about it.
You've got a little girl, would you let her swim with Aboriginal children in a swimming pool?
I would. They'd be as good as what she is.
And you think the children should be allowed to swim together?
Of course. You should. They're all children, they're all the same.
Would you swim with them?
No, I don't. I wouldn't swim in the baths with them, although I like the old I've had quite a lot to do with him.
And you think they should be allowed to swim, especially the kids?
I certainly do think so, with
What
all
about-
my heart.
You've come to a person who knows quite a lot about the treatment of Aboriginals.
And you think that the children should be allowed to swim in the
I-
pools with the white children?
Indeed, yes. I think that the apathy would be worse here than in Africa if they don't do something constructive about the children.
What do you think about this segregation against Aborigines in western towns in New South Wales?
I reckon there should be none of it. There should be white, black, all together, live together.
I think that the Australian Aborigine is equal to one of us. As you know, they were the first in the land before us, and I reckon that segregation against them is silly and ridiculous. I think that they should have the equal rights such as any Australian should have today.
Well spoken. You sell newspapers, do you?
Yeah, I sell newspapers at Newtown Bridge, and I'm a good salesman at that.
Guys, you know, watching these clips, it just all of a sudden gives me a new perspective on things. Do you realize how much it can be easier for people to get along? Because I feel like for the most part of it, it's white men who created these harmful systems, right?
Yeah.
And if white women could stand with the other groups that are being harmed, and if they all could stand and work together, then I feel like the world would be a better place, you know?
I really do like seeing melanated people and Aboriginal people from Australia speak up about their rights and what they need without necessarily having to rely on the white man to speak up for them on what they themselves need, you know.
Right. It's like they say, the way she said, you cannot allow other people to speak on your behalf and talk about what you need or what you do not need. There's this one saying that says, if you do not wear a certain type of shoes, you cannot know where it hurts, right? And one thing I can say for clear is that even for white people, I can never understand how white people feel, especially when they walk in the sun. There are things that we cannot understand about white people. We cannot understand why they need to wash their hairs every day, and we only see the results if they don't, you know. And that is something you cannot know. Like, for example, us here in Africa, we cannot know that fact unless you hear it or see it from somebody, or you live close to these people, you know.
And even at that, after we hear it, we can never truly understand what the white person is, or the concept of the white person. And that is why I can never even myself support the idea of me as an African standing up to be an advocate of a white person or the community that is, you know.
Exactly.
So I really don't understand why, where there is a community where both white and black people or Aboriginals share the land, white people are representing even the Aboriginals in places like political seats in parliament, yet they don't know how these Aboriginal people live and where their shoe pinches, you know.
Right.
Telling me to go back where I come from, or to my own country, or deport me, or whatever. Sorry, but what do you think I am / from? What's happening? I'm like 100%. I can understand if an Aboriginal person was saying it, but my fellow Australians are saying it to me. Where am I from? I'm 100% white, West European.
Oh, we don't see color. Color doesn't mean anything. You see color. If someone speaks, sounds, or looks a certain way, they might be completely Australian, it doesn't matter. They're exhibiting more traits stereotypically of Islander does, or what a black person does, or an Asian, or really about who you are on the inside, or about how you present. What is an Australian and what's it meant to look like? If Australians are looking at him going, go back to where you're from, they have the moral standing, the ethical, cultural nationalism to be like, you're not from here, get out. Everyone always goes, stop being a victim, it's not about race. To my understanding, the person who actually is white, who doesn't present as white, tell him to go back. So I can tell him to go back, what do you think they're going to tell me?
The funny thing is that the people who always talk about you're not from here, go back to where you came from, it's not about race. The people who are normally loudest on this are the white people, right? Even in Europe, we've seen cases where apparently it started backfiring, and now not a lot of people say that, or those cases have gone quiet where...
Well, they've not gone quiet, they've just reduced.
They've reduced on the internet, but it got so bad to a point where black people used to be told every time, even in Europe, go back to where you're coming from. And let me just pass this point across. There are people who are born in Europe who happen to be black, right? Who necessarily don't have any relationship with Africa. They've been...
Except from their ancestry,
right? They've been living in Europe like generations and generations, yeah? And even those ones who are citizens are still being told, go back to where you're coming from. So why should you feel offended when you are looking like this, you're a palm-colored person, and somebody tells you to go back to where you're coming from? Because everybody has a history.
Right, and what's very interesting about the video that we've just watched is this was a white person being told by other white people to go back to where he's coming from. And this brother, I believe he's also Australian, he was asking, if a white person can be told, go back to where you're coming from, what about a person who looks like him, a melanated person?
Aura for aura, I feel like it would be fair if all, you know, people across the world were to be told, go back to where you're coming from. It's time, or even them, they start retracing their ancestry, and they start retracing their true origin, you know, because nowhere they are settling originally belonged to them. Even in South Africa, we do hear that when white people immigrated to South Africa, of course, they try and change history. It's so bad to a point where the generation today, there are those ones who genuinely believe
they were the original settlers of South Africa,
and South Africa belongs to white people, you know, and that black people should be settled somewhere else.
A migratory community that found them in South Africa.
But let's continue watching, guys.
And to every single Australian who thinks they're more deserving of living in this country than a POC or than the real Australians, the indigenous peoples, just listen, just hear me out. Let's say somebody comes into your house, your entire family except for you, and in front of you demolishes the whole house and builds a school. You would feel so violated, disrespected, and upset. Let's say the school's running and all the students are just looking at you and just acting like you don't deserve to be there, treating you like absolute crap, by the way, bullying you, singling you out, alienating you in your own home. But they're saying that it's not your home, it's their home. They're saying all they've known is this school and they don't know who you are and why you think that you're deserving of being here. And you're saying, no, well, this is my home. I was here before, I swear. But they're still looking at you sideways and they're still judging you. How would you feel? Wouldn't you feel outraged? Wouldn't you ask for a say in the rules or being represented, or wouldn't you just ask to be acknowledged as single, just acknowledgement for respect? That's what they're asking for. And then people in my comments are saying, oh, well, we've apologized so many times. What's apology without change? Sorry, what is apology? It's literally manipulation. That's what you guys are doing. It's the same in a toxic relationship when the guy says, sorry, I'll change, I'll be better, and he turns around tomorrow and cheats on you 7 times in front of you.
The people of Australia, originally Australia was an African land. In fact, in European documentation, they considered it an African satellite. When the British came into Australia and began the mass extermination of African people, they were crystal clear who they were exterminating because they said it. And also we know that right off the coast of Australia was an island called Tasmania, a little island off the coast of Tasmania. There are no living Tasmanians in existence right now. You can't find a Tasmanian man, woman, or child because the British systematically exterminated the entire population.
It wasn't until January 1967 that Aboriginal people in Australia were considered humans for the first time. In January 1967, there was a national referendum to decide if Aboriginal Australians should have Australian citizenship. Up to that point, they were officially, and you can document this, classified as flora and fauna and plants and animals.
Australia, they would literally breed out the melanin of the people. You know, they would take the children and take them to breeding camps and breeding farms and breed the darker ones and the mulatto ones with white. And they would literally breed the melanin out of these people. The movie Rabbit Proof Fence is about that breeding process, them breeding out the melanin of the Aboriginal people. So it was very deep what was going on over there.
When people talk about Australia, they love to highlight the beaches, the accents, the kangaroos. But you rarely hear them talk about the blood beneath the soil. Because Australia is just like the US. It wasn't discovered. It was invaded. And the first thing they tried to do was wipe the oldest living culture off the face of the earth. So let's back up for a second. The Aboriginal people of Australia have been on that continent for 65,000 years. Let that sit. They are the oldest continuous culture on Earth. Not only did they live in harmony with the land, they had complex languages, spiritual systems, astronomy, trade, and none of it was savage or primitive. But when the British showed up in 1788, they saw none of that. They saw a land they wanted and people they thought didn't count. So they claimed the land as nobody's land, like people weren't already living there. And what followed was centuries of massacre, displacement, slavery, and dehumanization. Aboriginal people were hunted like animals. Entire tribes were wiped out. Their water sources were poisoned. Children were taken. Women were assaulted. Men were imprisoned. Sometimes for just being Aboriginal. Their language banned. Their cultural practices outlawed. Their sacred land stolen. They weren't even considered full citizens on their land until 1967. Let me repeat that. The original custodians of that land weren't counted as people until less than 60 years ago. And from the late 1800s to the 1970s, the government had a plan to breed out the Black. That's not an exaggeration. That's what they actually called it. They took thousands of Aboriginal children from their families, the stolen generation, and placed them in white homes or church institutions. Sound familiar? They erased their names, told them their families didn't want them. And when those children cried for their mothers, nobody came. Because colonialism isn't just about land. It's about memory. And they were trying to erase it all. So when you hear people talk about Australia like it's just another Western paradise, know this. There's blood in the soil and trauma in the air. And the world is still catching up to the truth. Because Aboriginal people didn't just survive genocide. They preserved the oldest culture on the planet through it. And that's resistance. That's legacy. That's a miracle that colonizers couldn't kill, no matter how hard they tried.
When the descendants of defective sibling DNA start calling indigenous people uncivilized, it's projection, because in the 1500s, their lice-infested, disease-ridden ancestors dragged over 30 deadly diseases to this continent, which killed off more than 80% of the indigenous population because they were walking biohazards who did not bathe. These are people who literally threw their feces and urine outside of their windows and watched it fester in the streets until it rained and turned their towns into diarrhea soup. Meanwhile, indigenous people in the 1500s had public sanitation, organized waste removal, clean streets they swept and washed daily, and people who bathed daily, sometimes twice. We literally had to teach these plague-carrying invaders how to wash their asses. And then Mr. Trump University says we lived in tents. Tents? Our cities had towering architecture and stone temples that dwarfed anything in Europe during that time, in the Americas and in Africa. And since you mentioned Africa, Africans were master architects who gave the world mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Europe produced the colonizers who stole it all. Europe gave the world genocide, colonization, and syphilis. And some of y'all today still don't bathe.
So guys, welcome back. Listening to this video, the ones that we've compiled for you today, one thing I've come to realize is that the Black community, it's when you listen to people talk, that you do realize that the Black community carries a very heavy pain, that sometimes some of us might not even know we are carrying, you know, because listening to these people and how they live in Australia, I do believe that colonization and slavery, it did something to the Black community, and the fact that it has never been properly addressed or apologized and other communities gotten reparations, it's what makes this thing even more painful. You know, it feels like the Black communities constantly have to push down their pain in order for them to move past the pain they're feeling.
Right. My question is, Black people had their own systems. Like, for example, here in Africa, people had medicines, traditional medicines that worked for them. People knew how to heal the body without necessarily having these modern inventions that we have right now. But for some reason, there's a lot of things that the communities could cure themselves that right now, if you try and find the record for this, you will not find it anywhere. You understand? There are a lot of inventions that people had. There are a lot of languages that people spoke that right now have gone extinct because somebody came into your land and told you that your way of living was a savage way of living, and that your way of living was very primitive. You know, the funny thing is that today I saw a video on TikTok where there's this African who went to live in Australia, right? And she was saying how much she had dressed up, even worn shoes to go out, only to realize that the normal average Australian walks barefoot in Australia, because, which got my curiosity, you know, and this she found out is because of the venomous, you know, animals, they don't wear shoes. Like, for example, spiders, snakes. So people might just wake up, you wear your shoes, and you don't know that there's a snake hiding in it or a spider hiding in it. So for this reason, others choose to walk barefoot, you know. And so, and how I decided to go into her comment section because I found it was interesting, you know. And in her comment section, I found people who are bitter, Africans and others, who are talking about when white people came into Africa and found people walking barefooted, they called us primitive and they called us, you know, savages, you know, just because we were not conforming to what they considered an okay way of living in society, you know. So for them, when Africans or any other Black person was walking barefoot, it wasn't appealing. But for them, when they do it, it's something that is very much glorified, you know. And so I looked at that, and that was a very good example, because in America, there are people who've made a trend out of walking barefoot. They call it earthing, right? And to be honest, yeah, walking barefoot, those are things
It
that
does have its own benefits, much as it has its own disadvantages.
But people used to, when the times that people used to walk barefoot, and I can tell you this for free, even here in Kenya, not just in Kenya, but Africa, when you go to the very rural parts of Africa or Kenya, you find people who still walk walk barefooted, and these people are very healthy. You know, somehow you get to connect with earth, and then there's a way. I don't know how many of you can prove this, right? But I do believe when you wear shoes, it kind of alters your feet, yeah, because your leg develops to adapt kind of to how your shoes fit you, you know. So for that reason, I'm like, when white people do things, it's considered fashionable, it's glorified, things of that nature. But when it's coming from a black person or a person of color, then it's something that is frowned down upon. You know, they look down on it, and you know, the things of that nature. So Aboriginals, I was also quite surprised to learn that they were not considered human beings, and only until 1967 is when they were considered human beings, meaning before they legally recognized as humans, what were they looking at Aboriginals as, and what were they doing to these people before they started looking at them as humans, you know?
Right,
You
and
can
you know,
only
guys,
imagine.
Right, and you know, guys, it's not so hard to believe that there was a time in point in life where Aboriginals were put into camps and they were breeding out their melanin by making them mingle with white people and having white babies, stuff like that, you know, because it has happened before with the case of Argentina, which we'll always use as the most successful,
the prime example
and the most successful point of reference, you know. And as I hear Aboriginals of Australia speak like this, I feel like this is not the first conversation we are hearing. We've been hearing it a lot with the black community of America, right? And as we always say, the black community of America was the most vocal about what happened to them and slavery. And right now we started hearing a few people from different communities in the black communities, the black Brits of Europe, and now the Aboriginals of Australia, you know. And also we kind of see a few Africans also try and debunk how slavery changed the continent, you know. What I have to say is that all these communities experienced pain from the same person, you know. And how do we fix this? And as just one lady has spoken here, she said that in order for black people to truly know who they are, we must start by rewriting our own history, you know, because right now a lot of people in the black community are walking with heavy baggage and they don't even know what is weighing them down. And this is generational trauma of the system they've grown under, you know. And for white people, there is also another melanated sister here. She was wearing a red hoodie. She was saying that an apology alone is not enough, and they do agree with her on this. And some people might want to ask, how then do the white community make things better? And to that I'd say, just by simply starting to change the systemic racism and how they've set up the system to only benefit them while disadvantaging a big number of the melanated population.
You look at, I feel like there's a lot of way they could change things around. You know, if you give an apology, I feel like you can also, instead of talking it, you can also walk the apology by how you decide to show change.
You can show it through your actions.
The first thing is agreeing and accepting that you did another community wrong and accepting the full consequences of that, because it's easy to say we are not our ancestors and therefore we are not responsible for what they did, but are you benefiting from the systems they left behind? Yes, you are. So how can you undo that? The first thing I felt like black Americans gave a blueprint of what would be a show of a good start of faith. You know, you can start by reparations to black people, and so this is where you sit down and ask who deserves reparations, you know. And I feel like there are different countries that holds white people, and you have to look at, because the same way you cannot say you'll give this reparations to black Americans and for it to look like people from Congo, you know. It will manifest itself in different ways. So whatever black Americans feels like that would be a good way of giving them reparations, that is what you have to sit down, consider and act on it, you know, as a show of good faith, you know. For Belgium, you sit down and look at first of all, agree that you did that country harm, and then look at how you can turn things around, you know? Look at what they did to Congo and its citizens, you know? I feel like that is something that the way somebody can talk and say Africans were colonized to a point where their brains are still colonized to this day.
That is a true statement.
It's a true statement because for Africans, they were made to believe that they were stupid. They were made to believe that nothing good can ever come out of Africa.
Right, and right now, most of us still believe that when we walk into a room to look for a job, and amongst us is one white person, the white person is fit to rule all of us.
And that is
the mentality that is in Africa.
Right, that is why you find Africans...
He'll be given priority to talk, he'll be given priority to anyway, you get the whole picture.
Exactly, and that is why you find Africans right now risking their lives to get to the first world countries because they believe nothing good can come out of Africa, you know, so the mind is still colonized. So in short, there's a lot of things you can do to undo what your ancestors did and whatever systems they left behind. There's a lot of things you can undo. I feel like, okay, this world is not fair, and whoever said that, I feel like was a founding father of the white supremacy. You know why? Okay, I'm saying that because indeed the world is not fair. And when you look at American structure, black people are the least people who are cared about in America. Even in healthcare system, you find systemic racism. In education, you find that racism in their systems. They purposefully fail black kids, you know, to just put them behind, or they present very difficult hurdles compared to their white counterpart to ensure that the black child graduates. When you look at Australia, they have their own issues that they're going through, that when you sit side by side, you take a melanated person from Australia, take a melanated person from America, take a melanated person from Africa, they start talking, you find that they have a lot more to bond over because they've gone through the same issues, but it manifested in different ways, you know. So you ask yourself, what can be done about this, right? Because I feel like in today's age and time, like, no one has the luxury to sit down, especially if you're a palm-colored person, and say that you don't know what racism looks like. I feel like right now, internet has done its best to bring people's stories and testimonies to your doorstep, literally to your screens, for you to know what happens on a daily life, you know.
So guys, let us know what you think about this episode. Maren, do you have any last words? Or
last words, me, I'd say there's a lady who spoke here in the first clip, amongst the first clips, and she's Aboriginal and she's also an actress. I love the fact that she was not afraid to speak when she had the podium and told that journalist who was white and trying to shut her or
what being Aboriginal is. Yet he is a white man.
He's a white man who's a journalist. Do you know white men are the most privileged people on earth? Like literally they work with a lot of privilege, you know. And he's trying to explain to her the struggles Aboriginal people go through, and she's sitting right beside him. That's her job, literally, to echo whatever her people are going through, you know. And she wasn't afraid because there's ways that could have ended. She can't be blackballed from the industry she's in. She can be outcasted for speaking out for her own people, you know. And my thing is, guys, whenever something bad happens, just turn the mirror on them for them to know that it is wrong, and you're aware that whatever they're doing to you is not correct, you know. When things are done in darkness is when it flourishes. A thief robs not during daylight, at night, right?
When you call him out for being a thief, he will be more careful if he doesn't
about robbing your house,
because he knows rumors are out there that he is a thief.
Right. And look at abusive partners. They only do it because the
partners stay
people
quiet
outside the house pretend not to. Okay, neighbors might know, but they won't involve themselves if somebody doesn't ask for help, right? So if the partner keeps quiet, it only happens in the house. That gives the abuser that layer of protection. They continue doing it. But if you start being a chatterbox and you start talking up, asking for help, this person is gonna be scared to continue to do that to you, you know. And that, reflecting on today's topic, is what I'm saying. A lot of voices, the strength in number, the strength in unity. Echo out your your stories and bring them out so that they know, right? There was a point
stare
when
them in the faces, because
exactly.
I once heard that some, not all, some white people don't like being told the truth of the cruelty they exhibited to the world.
Yeah.
But when you tell them that truth, of course there is denial because no one ever likes to be told you are a bad person. But gradually with time, they start seeing what you're telling them, and them themselves start being advocates of change amongst their own community.
Right, and there was a point where a palm-colored person could afford the luxury of saying that they are not their ancestors, and they could pretend that or maybe they didn't know out of ignorance what their ancestors did to other groups of people. But right now they can't afford that luxury, being that it stares them in the eyes every time people talk, you know.
Right, because to be quite honest with you, growing up, I didn't know in Australia there were black people. Actually, what made me know that there were black people, more so Aboriginals of Australia, was movies. There was there was a movie called Tidelander that we watched, and that was the first time I ever saw a black a black Australian, and then followed by a movie called Wentworth, which was an Australian production also. And in that movie is where we saw this lady, and we were like, oh, Australia has
we didn't
black
even know
people?
what Aboriginals meant. We were like, when she was asked, what are you? Are you an Aboriginal? And we were like, what's that? You know, are we not humans? That? Anyway, that is part of growth, and that is part of eradicating ignorance.
Right.
It's good to know thy history, if I may say.
Guys, let us know what you think about this episode, and you can also consider subscribing if you're new to our channel, and we'll see you on our next episode.